Today, I want to talk about something that's really going to change how you think about relationships between the US and Europe. Just recently, Washington released a document that sent shockwaves through European capitals. It's not just a regular old strategy, it's a bold declaration that seems like it's waging an ideological war against some of its allies. There are leaked chapters in this document with titles that sound straight out of a campaign. Four countries appear to be on the chopping block for leaving the European Union, and there's a peace plan for Ukraine that has Kiev feeling like they're surrendering. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is over the moon, European nationalists are being unusually silent, and Brussels is nervously watching as their entire project might be crumbling. Now, I worked in one of those big media organizations for years, the ones you probably know well, the ones that help shape narratives and control the information people receive. I watched as editors manipulated stories, buried important facts, and packaged everything to fit a certain message. Eventually, I couldn't do that anymore, so I left. Now I focus on bringing you the truth without any corporate strings attached. What I'm about to share is the kind of story they'd want to sanitize and tone down to make it easier to digest, but you deserve to hear what's really going on. If you find value in this independent analysis, it would really help if you hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I want you to know that we put a ton of effort into fact-checking every claim and cross-referencing sources to make sure we're not feeding you misinformation. It's a lot of hard work that takes resources, and if you're interested in supporting what we are building here, consider becoming a sponsor of the channel. It means so much to us and keeps us accountable to you. And make sure to stick around until the end because I've got the most intriguing piece of this whole story saved for last. Just last Friday, officials in the European Union woke up to find something shocking in their inboxes. The Trump administration released its new national security strategy, comprising 33 pages of official policy, and let me tell you, it pulled no punches. This wasn't your typical diplomatic talk or the usual complaints about who's paying for what in terms of defense. You won't believe what just came out of Washington. They're actually declaring an ideological war on their own allies. There's this serious document that warns Europe could face civilizational extinction. Yes, extinction within 20 years if things keep heading in the same direction. It's not just some far-off concern either. It's happening pretty soon. The document paints a bleak picture, suggesting the continent will be unrecognizable. The language is intense and almost apocalyptic. It slams migration policies and takes a swing at what Washington calls censorship of free speech. And it lays out the reality of declining birth rates and pressure on political opposition in a straightforward way you wouldn't expect from friendly nations. But wait, it gets even wilder. Just recently, reports from sources like Defense One, The Times, and the Daily Mail dropped some eye-opening news. There's a longer version of this document, an unpublished chapter that didn't get officially released, and the title, Make Europe Great Again. Yep, it's a nod to Trump's campaign slogan, but aimed at Europe. A lot of folks might overlook what's really inside this leaked part. It names 4 countries as priority partners for a plan that suggests detaching from the European Union. Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland. And get this, these aren't random picks. Each of these countries either has a right-wing populist government or some strong ultra-right movements that have been pushing back against Brussels. Now, the White House is flat out denying this alternate version exists. They're calling it fake and waving it off as made-up nonsense. But European capitals aren't just sitting back waiting for confirmation. They're already freaking out. The strategy is pretty clear about what it wants. It talks about fostering resistance to the current path of Europe from inside European nations. It's all about backing what they call patriotic parties. And that's not just any term. It specifically refers to groups like Marine Le Pen's National Rally in France, Germany's Alternative for Germany, and Britain's Reform Party. These are movements that the mainstream political scene in Europe has spent years trying to keep out of power. Analysts over at the Brookings Institution actually have a name for this: constitutional regime change policy. But don't get it twisted. This isn't about military intervention or the usual economic pressure tactics. This whole situation is pretty wild when you think about it. The United States appears to have made it a part of their official policy to push for changing governments in NATO countries, all so they can install leaders who share the same views. Just think about that for a second. It's not just talk. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, head honcho of Europe's biggest economy, was pretty blunt about it. He clearly stated that if democracy in Europe needed any saving, Europeans would handle it themselves. There's really no sugarcoating that. His words highlight a serious challenge to the usual American attitude towards Europe. And it's not just a reaction out of frustration or bruised egos. European leaders are now saying they need to be more independent when it comes to security issues. Stuff that used to be whispered behind closed doors is now being broadcasted for all to hear. Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, took it a step further and told Washington that meddling in European matters is off the table, stressing that only European citizens should decide who governs them. On the surface, that seems like a basic democratic idea, but hearing it come from such a high-ranking official addressing the US is pretty remarkable. It shows how much the relationship has soured. And while this diplomatic back and forth is interesting, the real story comes from what's happening in Moscow. While Brussels is getting anxious and Berlin is pushing back, the Kremlin is practically celebrating. Russian officials have pointed out that the new strategy from the US actually fits well with their own vision. Imagine that. Moscow and the White House finding common ground on Europe's future, while European leaders are left watching from the sidelines. Here's the kicker. The US document doesn't even label Russia as an opponent. Instead, it mentions that many Europeans see Russia as a real threat, but it doesn't explicitly call Russia a threat itself. Experts at Germany's Marshall Fund say this is a big shift that could really shake up NATO's unity, especially as Russian forces continue their offensive in Ukraine. The timing is just awful. And while we're on the topic of Ukraine, there's more going on. Draft peace plans for Ukraine have been circulating recently, and they've been reviewed by sources like Axios, AFP, and the Associated Press. There's a lot of information being discussed surrounding these plans. In Kyiv, people are in total shock right now. There's a proposal flying around that suggests giving up some territory to Russia, letting Moscow back into the G8, and blocking Ukraine from joining NATO. It sounds like Ukraine is being asked to give in to everything the Kremlin wants. Ukrainian officials aren't holding back. They're calling this plan absurd and a serious threat to their independence. But here's the kicker. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, says the president is backing this plan. So this isn't some off-the-cuff idea from a random staffer. It looks like this is the official stance. Europe is being told to adapt to a new normal, where American meddling in their internal affairs is just the way it is. At the same time, they're being asked to accept a deal that hands Putin basically everything he's been asking for. Now, European leaders have a tough choice to make. Do they accept this new reality and go along with American interference in their politics? Or do they finally push for the strategic autonomy they've been talking about for years but haven't really acted on? Norbert Röttgen from the German Bundestag put it plainly. He pointed out that the US now sees interfering in European countries as a key part of its foreign policy under the MAGA idea. That's not just analysis, that's a serious accusation. And as we dive deeper into this situation, it's becoming clear just how divided things really are. Analysts are sounding the alarm that the divisions within the EU could be irreversible. The 4 countries mentioned in the leaked proposal, Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland, are no coincidence. They already have right-wing populist governments or strong far-right movements that have been pushing back against Brussels for years. If the US actively supports their move away from the EU, it could lead to a crisis for the Union that's even worse than Brexit. In Vienna, debates have been heating up since the news broke. The NEOS party, part of Austria's government, used a recent session to go after the right populist Freedom Party of Austria, accusing them of working with Moscow. It's a tense time, and as things unfold, it's clear the stakes couldn't be higher. There's a push for a stronger and more confident Europe, but it really feels like this is a bit late to the party, especially as the old world order is falling apart right before our eyes. One part of a recent strategy document has raised quite a few eyebrows, particularly its stance on NATO. It suggests that European nations should start relying less on American military support, all while alluding to the US backing off its commitments to defend Europe. The Kremlin has jumped on this, welcoming the call to halt NATO's expansion, which is something they've been insisting on as a peace condition for Ukraine. Experts from the Foreign Policy Research Institute have expressed concerns, saying this stance could weaken those European governments that are actually stepping up to counter Russian aggression. In a strange twist, the far-right political groups in Europe, who would normally be all about American support, are keeping pretty quiet. For example, Alice Weidel, who's one of the leaders of Germany's AfD party, has criticized Trump's trade tariffs as being really harmful to Germany. Then there's Marine Le Pen's protege, Jordan Bardella, who flat out accused the US of waging an economic war against Europe. A recent poll by the European Council on Foreign Relations revealed that only 20% of AfD supporters think Trump is doing any good for their country, with 47% feeling the opposite. The picture is even grimmer among National Rally voters in France, where just 18% see Trump positively, while 43% do not. The bottom line is pretty clear. The idea of America first doesn't mesh well with Germany first or France first. Those who identify with nationalist sentiments in Europe have figured this out quickly. If Americans back them, but it negatively impacts their nation's economic interests, they could lose their electoral support. On top of that, there's this leaked document suggesting the creation of a new group called the C5, which would include major powers like the US, China, Russia, India, and Japan, but would leave out European nations. This feels like a step back to the 19th century in geopolitics, making Europe more of a bystander in global affairs. Analysts from CSCS have termed this strategy as a painful and shocking wake-up call for Europe, highlighting how misaligned the European leaders are with Trump's vision. Reactions among European leaders seem to go from confusion to anger, but there's one thing they all agree on. The times when Europe could lean on America's defense while doing its own thing are over. Kaja Kallas, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and a former Prime Minister of Estonia, is among those trying to navigate this new reality. Brussels is trying to keep up this diplomatic vibe, claiming that decisions should be made by Europeans. But really, it sounds more like a frantic scramble to maintain the idea of independence. The Brookings Institution has pointed out that the new approach from the US isn't really about isolation, like the Trump administration suggests with its take on a 21st century Monroe Doctrine, nor is it purely transactional, which is what many folks in Europe were hoping for. Instead, it seems more ideological and revisionist, looking to shake up the current European project and swap it out for a confederation of sovereign nations led by right-leaning populist governments that are more aligned with Washington than Brussels. Europe is in a bit of a tight spot. On one side, there's the pressing need to stay engaged with the US during this crucial time for Ukraine. On the other, there's the right to make its own rules and run its own policies. The decisions made by the EU in the next few months could impact not just its future, but also shape global security for many years to come. Right now, Brussels seems to be losing the narrative game, as Washington and Moscow are apparently finding common ground without involving Europeans. So let me break this down for you. What's happening isn't just typical diplomatic disagreements. This isn't just another phase of tension across the Atlantic that will settle down with a new US administration. We're looking at a major shift. Washington seems to be openly working toward regime change in allied democracies, while Moscow is sitting on the sidelines enjoying the show. Meanwhile, European nationalists are finding out that just because they share ideological views doesn't mean they're safe from economic fallout. The European Union, this ambitious project of unity and shared power, is now seeing its member states caught in the crossfire as its main security supporter is looking to pull them apart. The Make Europe Great Again chapter, whether it's officially acknowledged or not, shows the true strategy: to break apart European unity by backing nationalist movements that push back against Brussels. There's also an interest in pushing for a resolution in Ukraine that meets Moscow's needs, creating an exclusive club of great powers that doesn't include Europe. Not to mention, there's a push to weaken NATO by questioning defense commitments. All of this seems aimed at dismantling the current European structure and replacing it with something that fits better with what Washington wants. And here's the most intriguing part, which I hinted at earlier. European citizens are watching all this unfold. They can see their governments getting pulled in different directions. So it turns out that Washington is ignoring a lot of key security concerns and sacrificing economic interests. And as a result, we're seeing the Kremlin take a victory lap over American policies. The nationalist parties in Europe that were supposed to be aligned with Trump are now starting to pull away. It's pretty clear that America first has turned into Europe last. This creates a chance for something new, not more European integration, since Brussels doesn't have the credibility for that at the moment, but for real European strategic independence. This isn't just a catchy phrase or a dream for the future, it's a necessity now. When an ally treats you like an obstacle, and your opponents are cheering on your allies' plans, and then domestically opposition figures see that foreign support comes at a heavy price, you kind of have to rely on your own strength. The big question is whether European leaders have what it takes, both the guts and the skills, to actually make it happen. They'll need to build a solid defense, establish economic strength, and stand together when their union is facing pressure from all sides. Right now, the signs aren't looking too promising, but sometimes the only way to move forward is when you find that all other options are blocked. So here's the takeaway. Washington has rolled out a strategy that seems to declare war on the current European setup. There's a leaked version that apparently points out 4 countries for extraction from the EU, and yes, Russia is approving. European nationalists are realizing that their ideological friendships have their limits. Plus, Brussels is losing control over the story. Meanwhile, Ukraine might end up with a peace deal that looks a lot like surrender, and the unity of NATO is being shaken from the inside. Europe finds itself at a crossroads where every option looks tough, but sitting still could be even worse. If this discussion opened your eyes to something new, go ahead and give that like button a tap. Share this with folks who need a clearer picture of what's actually going on behind the headlines. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because I'll keep tracking this story as it unfolds. If you believe in independent journalism that doesn't bend to the whims of big corporations or government agendas, think about supporting this channel. Your help allows us to carry on this work without compromises. Feel free to drop a comment with your thoughts. I read every single one of them. Until next time, stay informed, stay skeptical, and keep questioning everything. It's a tough job to dig into these kinds of stories, but it's absolutely worth it. It's truly important to take a moment to think about the media environment we're in nowadays. We're surrounded by noise, political nonsense, and straight-up lies. Every day I go through tons of documents, verify leaks, and piece everything together to find the real truth. It's a constant struggle against fake news. I don't have a big corporate backing anymore. I chose to be independent so I could really talk freely to you. But let me tell you that freedom doesn't come cheap. That's why I'm genuinely asking you to think about supporting this channel. Your help isn't just a donation, it's an investment in honesty. It lets me keep things running, dig deeper when others settle for just the press release, and make sure you get all the facts, even when they're tough to handle. If you appreciate what I'm doing, please give that like button a click, subscribe so you won't miss any updates, and check the link to join our community of supporters. We're all in this together, navigating a world that's changing faster than we can keep up. Thanks for watching and for trusting me with your time.